Patterns of repetitive and restrictive behavior are another typical trait associated with ASD. You may have noticed patterns of pedantic or rigid speech, echolalia, which is a repetition of words or phrases, and excessive indulgence in gibberish, or patterns of repetitive vocalizations like humming, squealing, or other intentional noise making. Children on the spectrum also display atypical speech, movement, or play. Among the forms of atypical movement, children with ASD will characteristically engage in repetitive hand movements such as clapping, finger flipping, flicking, flapping their hands when moving. They also have problems with posture and deambulation, for example, toe walking. There are also some less observable behaviors such as intense body tensing and excessive teeth grinding, which might lead to injury. A repetitive and stereotypical use of objects is also common. Examples can be non-functional play with objects, like waving sticks, dropping items, or lining up of toys or objects. Other behaviors include repetitively opening and closing doors or turning lights on and off. Another noticeable trait is a tendency to engage in ritualistic behaviors and also a very high level of resistance to change. A child with ASD will typically engage in very specific routines with unusual multiple steps or sequences of behavior. They also will insist on rigidly following specific routines, and these routines tend to be unusual. They also have ritualized patterns of verbal and nonverbal behavior. They might repeat questions on specific topics. They might have verbal rituals expecting that certain things should be said in a specific way, and other compulsions. Very challenging to parents is the resistance to change. Children with ASD have a particularly hard time with transitions from one activity to the next or from one place to the other, and tend to overreact to trivial changes. As your child grows up, you'll also notice an overall lack of sense of humor and an inability to understand non-literal aspects of speech. Idiomatic expressions are often misunderstood or taken literally. You'll also find your child to be excessively rigid, inflexible, and rule-bound in behavior and thought. Your child may also be excessively preoccupied with objects or topics. An abnormal interest in a topic may lead to repeating it and bringing it up repeatedly, despite the lack of interest by others or prompting to move on. You'll find your child excessively preoccupied with numbers or other symbols. These excessive preoccupations may also give rise to the child being unusually perfectionistic. On a final note, I'd like to discuss the atypical sensory behaviors and responses, and one worrisome aspect is the high tolerance for pain, poking their own eyes, preoccupation with texture, which includes also attraction or aversion to texture. There's a tactile defensiveness. They do not like to be touched by certain objects, certain textures. They might have a strong aversion to having their hair or toenails cut, or for that matter, their teeth brushed. Other atypical sensory behaviors and responses include unusual visual exploration and activity, in particular close inspection of objects or of themselves for no particular purpose. Atypical sensory behaviors might hypersensitivity to sound, lights, tastes, smells, as well as touch and texture of objects might include unusual squinting, odd responses to sensory inputs in general, unusual sensory exploration with objects, such as licking and sniffing objects or people. A concern may come from pica, which is a tendency to eat non-food items, which is fairly common with children on the spectrum.